I always find it a bit curious that people tend to wish to leave Great Britain when their health's in decline, they're getting older and they can't speak a word of anybody else's language. So I like to take the rip out of it a bit. So seeing as it's the weekend, let's not be too serious there. Here's my little piece for Twitter on Distraction TV. This week it's A Place in the Sun. A Place in the Sun host, Chlamydia, is eager to meet up with this week's lucky couple. Second time around, Stan and Irene are looking for their forever home in the sun. Their wish list is a pool, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a sea view, gardens, and to be close to the beach, with a budget of just £55,000. The host takes them to 3 properties, one in Playa Plonka. It's just 20 minutes taxi ride from the beach and has sea views if Stan uses the fire escape and a pair of binoculars. Property 2 is just a day's drive from the coast at Les Nachos, a close-knit community where everyone is married to their cousins. The 33 steps up the hillside urbanisation is a killer for Stan, who suffers from asthma, angina, high blood pressure, and being an all-round fat hasn't helped. Obviously, it's a glandular problem with Stan, as he's got an overactive cake and beer gland. Irene has just packed up smoking 40 a day, which caused her to get a second mortgage and can now taste her Vindaloo curries again. With 5 adult children between them, Irene is glad that 2 of hers are absolute flakes who wouldn't want to come and share in their new dream in the sun. As they reach the 3rd property in Cala Colon Irrigatia, Stan's recurring hives are playing havoc in the sweltering Mediterranean sun, and his armpits are red raw and stinging. The 4 medications he's now on for the hives, the sudden psoriasis and acid reflux that he's developed since his 6th booster, have an unfortunate side effect of making Stan's breath smell like gas. Filming had to be temporarily stopped as the host thought she could smell what was in fact a leak. The emergency services were in fact called as the residents were evacuated. Stan was reassuringly breathing his gassy breath on the evacuees to prove there was nothing to worry about. Sadly, nothing actually ticked their boxes, and Irene returned to the UK very disappointed. So did Stan. He was just the same as Irene, but covered in Johnson's talc. I only do this sort of stuff to lighten up the misery. Otherwise, we just get down, don't we? Talking about health, there's a really good video from Asim Malhotra about statins. Now, I don't know what your view is on these, but Dave used to take statins and he's come off them. Our choice. Everybody has to make their own choice with health, don't they? But we actually came across Asim before he got famous, if you know what I mean, because we read 1 or 2 of his articles. And when Dave came off his statins, I've got to say, the joint pain went, he'd far more energy and he wasn't such a bad-tempered sod. Actually, I ended up never having fantasies about throwing a spaghetti bolognese over his head once he came off the statins. It's amazing, really, the difference it made to our day-to-day life. Yes, you can be a miserable, bad-tempered bugger if you're on certain medication. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute you should come off any medication. What I'm saying is I've noticed that more and more people, we did this a number of years ago before lockdown and before anything else had happened, and I think a number of people now are taking more notice of the health and looking at alternative measures to Big Pharma, because obviously after the obscene amount of profit that's been made in this last few years with a new medication, how much have they been coining in with this stuff that they put us on for, ad infinitum? You're supposed to take them forever. We've managed to keep abreast of things with Dave's health by just real slight dietary changes and a bit more exercise. Dave plays golf 3 times a week in the summer, and we're very active with the dogs and the garden and other stuff, going walks, etc. But obviously, everybody's got to make their own mind up about that. But there's one thing I'm absolutely convinced of, and that is I won't be taking any notice of authority figures that recommend medical procedures or the intake of something. I'm being careful with my vocabulary here. When people like Sajid Javid, who tell you to do this, that and the other, because he's the health minister of the time, and yet suddenly he's not even in politics anymore. They get out the game, don't they? And he came from banking anyway. Wow, people say to me, "You're no expert." Yeah, but I'm listening to people who are no expert either. They're just listening sometimes to very one-sided science. And what always got me with the way they treat us, especially with the lockdowns, we have to see the funny side in it. I'm not belittling what went on. Lockdown was dreadful for a lot of people, and especially the young. If you'd locked me down at 16 when I lived at home with my mum and dad in a scruffy house, I'd have gone insane. I don't think I could have handled it. Different living in a detached house with a nice big garden. And that's why I did so much work with people who were less fortunate, because people have no right to lock you down. It's madness. But what always got me was, as this was unfolding, I was watching videos on Twitter and Facebook, and it shows these 3 old dears sat on a bench, somewhere like Brighton, and they're just taking in some sea air, probably 3 old ladies. And these wardens, we had these COVID wardens, they came up and arrested them. They arrested these 3 old dears for being together 20 miles down the coast. Over 100 people were filming an episode of Doctor Who. Now, I'm not being funny, but if it was Ebola, would you be filming an episode of Doctor Who? How is filming an episode of Doctor Who more important than 3 old girls having a bit of company and a bit of fresh air? It's just bonkers that they actually expected people to believe it. There were just so many things. I can't even begin to say what I found ridiculous about, the way we handled it. And it's funny because people wondered why so many countries behaved the way they did at the same time. Ironically, I found out by just looking at a tweet from Tony Blair, where he announced proudly to the world that his institution, the Tony Blair Institute, were embedded in governments across the world to advise on restrictions. So now you can see where the lockstep comes in, can't you? The same place is giving the same advice to all the same governments. And when you think the WEF also are pleased to announce that, say, I'm embedded in the governments across the world. Klaus tells us, doesn't he, just before he's retiring, Tony Blair tipped to take his place. What could possibly go wrong? But he likes to say, we are involved in the cabinet, and then they like to get the clause into any MPs that they think might be decent leaders in the future. World Economic Forum, future leaders. I noticed Kemi Badenoch is one of these. Nothing to worry about there. But this is where I correlate it all together, and I just think, whoa, slow down there, partner. You're not roping me into any of this again. I will be very vigilant in what you try and roll out. Because the thing is, you could understand this. The thing that always got me with all this, if it was so urgent, if it was so deadly, why couldn't drug manufacturers do it without making a profit? Why couldn't they just cover the cost? Surely it's an international emergency. Why didn't you just cover the cost? Why did we have to indemnify and allow them to make obscene profit? One drug company, the American one, beginning with P, made $100 million in just 12 months after the rollout, and it took them 20 years to make 40, sorry, not million, billion, $100 billion in 12 months. And they made 40 billion in the 20 years beforehand. So it took them 20 years to make 40 billion, and suddenly it takes them just 12 months to make 100 billion. That is serious money, and a lot of these manufacturers were in serious financial difficulty, like Johnson & Johnson, after a recent lawsuit for knowingly selling baby powder that had asbestos in it. For 10 years, they were fined by an American court for one case of breast cancer. There were other cases as well, 2 billion. They were fined 2 billion. Now, imagine that. They were on the cusp of absolute collapse before the rollout. Money, money, money must be funny in a rich man's world. I'm no singer. But you see what I'm getting at. Anyway, the thing is, we take more responsibility for our own health. We might be making mistakes, But I think there's quite a few people make mistakes, and I think they're working for NHS. So anyway, enjoy your weekend. It was just a bit of a lightener. And please let me know on the thread if you've made any changes to your medication lifestyle even that you think have benefited or had an adverse effect from what you were previously doing. And please put on the thread any, if you were denied treatment during lockdown, was there anything that you couldn't get done, like a elective, kill me when they call it elective surgery, like you want to have your bloody hip replaced. Oh yeah, I'll just have a new knee, that'd be great. Elective, like I'll just decide to have that. Yeah, why not? I'll have a knee. What do you think, Dave? Well, get me one. It's not elective, is it? You're usually in excruciating pain if you're going for something like that. And these comedians stopped it all so they could treat one disease. Madness.